Good morning and welcome to the inaugural Axios What's Next Summit. I'm Mike Allen, a co-founder of Axios. And when Roy Schwartz and Jim Vandehei and I started with a big idea, we couldn't have imagined this summit. So thank you. We appreciate those of you who are joining us virtually around the world and those of you who are joining us here in person. Wherever you are, we'd love for you to join the conversation. Hashtag What's Next Summit. What's Next Summit is our hashtag. We're going to bring you some of the world's leading thinkers and doers on the future of work, tech, money, cities, and my favorite, electric everything. Our themes today, as Jim Vandehei mentioned at the top, are at the heart of Axios journalism. From the very beginning, we've said we're going to make you smarter, faster on the topics that are changing the world over the next 5 to 10 years. And now here we are with the CEO talking to a robot. I want to pause to salute the amazing Axios events team. A year ago, Kristen Burkhalter, one of our great Axios leaders, said, we're doing this. A year ago, it wasn't so obvious that this was a good idea. But for 1 year, her team never considered the possibility that it wouldn't happen, and so it did. Like a lot of things in life, if you wait till it's obvious, you're too late. And so, applause for Axios events. Our first guests have worked together around the world. Laurene Powell-Jobs is the founder and president of the Emerson Collective, where the big idea is helping everyone live to their full potential. José Andrés, chef, humanitarian, founder of the World Central Kitchen. His big idea, feeding the many. They need no introduction, so in the spirit of Axios Smart Brevity, I won't introduce them. Laurene Powell-Jobs, José Andrés, welcome to the Axios What's Next Summit.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for
Thanks,
doing
Mike.
this.
Pleasure.
Chef, welcome. How are you? So, José Andrés, you were just tweeting from Ukraine and Poland, and our friend Steve Case, who's sitting up here, said to me, he's going to blow you off.
I cannot do this to Laurene. If I'm going to be with her, I show up, period.
It's a good rule, and this is such a treat for our audience because this is the first full day José Andrés has been in Washington, D.C. since February 27th. So thank you very much for making that possible. Laurene, you were just in Poland with José. Tell us what you were hoping to do and what you saw.
Thank you. Thanks for having both of us, Mike. We were visiting the Polish border with Ukraine and the World Central Kitchen team. And we wanted to see if we could be helpful, mindful, and presence for refugees and understand what was happening. We also had time with the World Food Program in Krakow. But when we went to Przemyśl, where the central kitchen is for World Central Kitchen, for that part of the border crossings, what we found was astonishing. The world, and I'll just talk for a minute, and of course I'm talking about José's work, so he speaks about it much better than I. But the World Central Kitchen had set up an extraordinary kitchen in a warehouse in the town of Przemyśl that was glistening, so perfectly clean, with giant round cooktops and stoves, and then these convection ovens and a walk-in refrigerator and freezer. And there were hundreds of volunteers and chefs from all over the world who were at task making food. There were people making homemade applesauce for baby food and packaging that. There were people who were making giant vats of borscht, and there was a giant one of paella, and the kitchen smelled heavenly. And it was just such a beautiful, beautiful moment in this kind of in the middle of a maelstrom where you have in the town of Przemyśl a town of 60,000 people that have seen 800,000 refugees come through in a month. And they coordinated them, they embraced them. The whole population of the town actually is housing a family or two, and that's widespread, of course, across the country. They meet them with dignity and care, and it's really kind of this very, very touching moment of the best of humanity in the midst of the worst possible circumstances.
Yeah, you mentioned mindfulness. I wonder what it was like for you.
For me, well, when you speak of refugees, perhaps that connotes some image in your mind, but these particular refugees were, by and large, young mothers, and children. So each woman there had multiple children. The people in the town had brought cribs and strollers and toys, and kids were running around being kids, taking toys and sharing and playing. And they had nursery schools set up, and they had little learning centers and little book areas. But at the same time, obviously, people had run from their homes. Everyone had a kind of a small suitcase with them, and we spoke to a number of the women who were just completely, obviously, shell-shocked, talking about the heartbreak and the shock of what they had just experienced and who they had left behind, which is typically their husbands, and some had sons who they left behind. And it felt, obviously, heartbreaking and unnecessarily brutal. And for me as an observer, it also felt shocking that in this time of 2022, the whole world is witnessing this utter destruction of people and community and cities and towns that were previously actually just flourishing.
And Jose, just in the last few days, you've seen the worst of it. So you've been to Bucha, you have been on roads where you had to worry about mines. Tell us about the turn this story has taken in the last 72 hours.
Well, yeah, I mean, the last 72 hours has been a celebration for the people of Ukraine, especially for the people of Kyiv, because you could see that they were, to a degree, relieved that the battle for Kyiv has been won by the Ukrainian troops. Kyiv was very intense. First, when I went in 10 days ago to access Kyiv, you have to go almost over 50, 60 checkpoints. And I arrived at 3 a.m. in the morning when curfew starts at 9. And you have to be telling them that you are there with organization that does food. And in every checkpoint, they tell you you're not going to go through. But you keep showing photos of what you do and maps of what we were doing. And every checkpoint opens up. But
at the checkpoints, they don't recognize you.
They don't recognize anybody. They are defending their city. They are. And I learned the value of a city without walls, which is a very difficult city to attack if you think about it, and a very smart way to defend. But the city without walls, what I saw was, as men and women were fighting the war, was many other people fighting the war other ways. It's what we say, we are fighting the war with people that come back, used to take care of giving extra help to the hospitals, arriving with wounded men and women and children, people that are fighting the war through food, the food fighters. There's many ways to fight the war. People can be looking at what happens and do nothing, or they can be fighting for what is right in many other ways beyond grabbing a gun. The last 72 hours was the moment that the people of Kyiv and all the people of Ukraine began saying, we have a chance to win this, to defend our country. The day that they announced that the troops moved totally away from Kyiv, you could see certain pride in everybody, but at the same time, they knew that this is only the beginning. Many people say this is phase 2. for us to go Bucha, maybe it was not the smartest thing to do in many ways, because Jews was barely liberated. But at the same time, felt was the right thing to do. We're talking about men and women that, the same way Laurene describes the border, mainly a lot of women with children. In those towns is the elderly or the super poor, people that had no money even to buy a bus ticket or don't own a car. And people that are so old or so sick that they cannot move and they stay behind. We had to go there because that's the people we were feeding. Over 30 days with no food, afraid to go out because if anybody moved, they will shoot you. That's a mother, that you were an elderly woman walking, trying to grab something to eat. Those people will be shot, as we saw in the images. And for me to arrive there and provide food to those people in Irpin, in Bucha, as maybe risky it was, we did it very well, very safe, and quite frankly, I will do it again every time. Right now, we are moving north, as all the cities are being liberated and the army is moving out. We are arriving there with thousands of hot meals and bags of food so people have in every family for a few days until the private sector reopens again, supermarkets reopen again, which is gonna take a few weeks.
What's it like to ride in a vehicle where you're worried about mines?
Well, you follow procedure. We were well supported by, in this case, by the mayor of Irpin. The division that helped retake Irpin, many of them were from Irpin and from Bucha. So while they are fighting the war, at the same time, they took time to say, these people are coming to feed our men and women. We're gonna be helping them. So we had protection. But obviously, you make sure that you don't move away from the roads, that you stay in the main road every time. If you have to maneuver back a couple of times, that you make the wrong turn, you make sure that you do it over the same road. You don't want to never to put yourself in any situation because they believe mines are all over. And unfortunately, until they are all clean, all the roads are clean, it's going to take weeks, months, if not years.
And Jose, when you show up in these areas, like sometimes you have propane tanks and like big cast iron pots, right? Like you show up, you travel light.
Yeah, well, Laurene described our kitchen in Shimish. But when I arrived there, I think it was 48 hours after the war began, Sam, who always shows up in some of these things for World Central Kitchen, within 12 hours we were cooking. And people say, how are you able to be cooking within 12 hours? Well, because we arrive and we find somebody's already doing it. We get alongside them and we say, can we join forces? And most of the time, everybody will say yes. In the early hours of this began, you will see firefighters cooking with charcoal and wood, making these big pots in every single place that was people arriving 24/7. And the firefighters were not firefighters anymore, but they were cooks. The people of Poland, for example, was unbelievable. In every single city, Laurene has described the situation of this town. A small city with a mayor doing extraordinary things, right? So since we arrived, by day 3, we were in every border around Poland, inside. By day 4, we began being inside Ukraine. By day 6, we were almost in every country, Moldova, Slovakia, Ukraine, Hungary, Romania. A week later, we opened in Spain. Before we knew, we were in 21 cities in Ukraine. Right now, we're doing around close to 300,000 meals a day. We are already on our way to 10 million meals. We are in every train station, in every bus station. We have cafes in every border pass 24/7. And right now, we have Nate Mook, the CEO of World Central Kitchen, in one of the most difficult cities, in Kharkiv in the north, feeding every shelter, feeding anybody that is in need of food. This is very much what has been the operation the last days, the last few weeks.
Jose, one more on Ukraine, then I can ask Laurene about your first big collaboration. You mentioned the last few days, going back to the weekend, have been a time of celebration as Russians pulled back. But we've also seen a lot more about the horrible things that occurred, the tactics that were being used. How concerned are you that starvation is being used by Russia as a tactic of war?
Well, it's a concern. food is being used for the history of humanity for very bad things.
And do you believe that's being done here?
They claim in some places that they are arriving themselves with humanitarian aid. Even some soldiers will tell you that we had to be careful how we did the food because Russians will take advantage of feeding people, claiming that they are the saviors and they are the ones. It's so funny how everybody has, obviously, an opinion. But one thing is clear. Ukraine is a big producer of cereal. If we don't help Ukraine, it's a new Secretary of Agriculture. I was able to meet with him. We asked Secretary Vilsack, we need to give Ukraine all the help they need to make sure that all the cereal for planting, all the pesticides or insecticides they need to make sure Ukraine keeps being the producing region that it is, that they will be successful this year. If they are not successful this year, beyond all the horrors of war, we will see the Middle East, we will see other parts of the world, that the price of cereal will raise. Many of these Middle East countries will not be able to have enough cereal to keep feeding themselves. Then we will see all the other ramifications that a war like this creates. Hunger in the world will only increase, many more millions will only increase. So this war that Ukraine is fighting for, they're fighting it on behalf of all of us. They're fighting for liberty, for freedom, for democracy, but they are also fighting for making sure that we can keep feeding the world.
Jose, do you believe Russia is using starvation, hunger as a weapon of war?
Totally. What they are doing in Mariupol, we delivered one time to Mariupol 1,000 meals. The people that did it put themselves in huge risk. The people are really hungry in Mariupol. They've not been allowing any humanitarian aid going in, but they've not been allowing even women and children live in Mariupol. They've been shot. Red Cross has been trying to do it. So sure they are doing it. What they are doing in Mariupol is something like nobody can be supporting. America, Europe, the rich countries of the world, they should stop right now from buying absolutely anything in terms of energy that is coming from Russia. We have one chance in history to show how you can play wars with true economic sanctions. So every company, for profit, they should for once put real profits on the side and put all the pressure they can on Putin and the Russian government to starve them from money that allows them to keep paying for this war. I hope Europe, I hope America will stop buying any energy that comes out of Russia. If this is the sacrifice in Europe we have to go, maybe I don't have hot water today, I think that's a sacrifice we all can do. We cannot allow what he's doing in Ukraine right now. We need to do more. I don't think we're doing enough.
And
that couldn't be any stronger.
Laurene, in 2017, when Hurricane Maria, Category 5, hit Puerto Rico, it was the worst U.S.-based disaster in a century, and it was the worst hit for Puerto Rico ever. Jose was there. He was having trouble, and you showed up. Tell us what happened.
Goodness. May I say one other thing, however, about the extraordinary impact and operational excellence of World Central Kitchen inside Ukraine and in the surrounding countries. When Jose says, you know, we're doing 300,000 meals a day, he said that very quickly.
Yes, yes.
I want people to just pause and think about what that means. Those are hot meals, and they're often served in pop-up tents, in train stations, on the actual border, many areas on the border, in cities, inside Ukraine, and they're often served on tables with tablecloths or small coverings.
Dignity for those guests.
Correct. The dignity is so deeply moving and so important. And so he's not talking about MREs. He's actually talking about a home-cooked meal. And for people who are hungry and cold and traumatized, the power of a home-cooked meal is not to be exaggerated. So I wanted to make sure that that visual came through, because it's so much heart that is put behind this, so much love. And I think then when people receive that, they feel the love and the care that's put into the food. So when we were together in Puerto Rico, I actually didn't know that Jose was having a difficult time. I knew it was extraordinarily difficult.
Yeah.
Well, he can set the stage about why things were so incredibly difficult. But what they did when they went to San Juan is they took over the sports arena, which often happens because that's a center where food at scale is already made. So what World Central Kitchen does is, in addition to having a network of chefs around the world, they also have a network of kitchens that perhaps didn't get destroyed by the catastrophe at hand. And in this case, because the hurricane destroyed so much of the island, there were a few kitchens in schools and the kitchen in the major arena that was still operational. So that's where they come in and they sort of send the message out to chefs and cooks. So a lot of people who are home cooks, who are quite excellent, also end up coming up. And they work with other humanitarian organizations and other food providers and multilaterals, but sometimes it's difficult for UN to make the kind of pivot, to get the kind of supplies that's needed. It's a bureaucratic process. They come in for the long term, but the people who respond immediately are the people who are right on the ground, who have the skills. And so when we came to San Juan, we came to this amazing setup where we saw thousands and thousands of sandwiches being made. We saw vats of paella that I had never seen this kind of capacity food at scale happen in this way. That was so beautiful. And then what they had done for distribution, because so many of the roads were destroyed, they actually used the US military for some of their distribution. And they also used local food trucks. So food trucks would come to the arena and load up and then head out. And when Jose describes these maps, they have literal maps that are hanging all over the walls, and they have population centers mapped out, and they're very precise about how many people are where and how the distribution is happening. And that very clever use of food trucks as distribution center and keeping food hot, and also people who know the communities, is very deliberate.
So that arena that Laurene described is an arena we were doing roughly 60,000 meals a day. The kitchen she described in Poland is a kitchen that we built to do 500,000 meals a day. We are far away from needing that, but for us it takes the same time to build a kitchen that you can do 500,000 meals a day than one that you do 50,000 meals a day. So in these scenarios, never waste time, because it takes me the same to create a restaurant like Minibar of 12 seats than the restaurant in Disney of 600 seats. It's the same time, people. It's the same meeting. So if you're gonna meet, just meet to build something is worth it. So when Laurene came, that was the main kitchen, but because gas was difficult and roads were difficult, we went from 10 friends the first day at Jose Enrique to more than 25,000 volunteers. We went from the first kitchen to 26 kitchens. We had 10, 20 food trucks. We went from 1,000 meals the first day to almost 150,000 meals a day, specifically in the places that needed hospitals and other places that were hard hit. But you know what we do that is very powerful? We don't cook. Cooking is easy. I mean, you understand, when you are with cooks, you're gonna eat. You are gonna eat. You are with cooks. What we do is we create distribution systems. It's like we create overfoods from scratch in a matter of days, where we produce, but more important, we distribute. And this is what makes us very different. And the urgency of now is yesterday. When Laurene came, I cry often when I tell the story. I hope I will not today. was very powerful in more ways than one. Was very powerful in more ways than one because we were spending money we didn't have. We were spending money that is like, okay, we'll see how we pay for this shit. It looked like my restaurants that I opened them and then, oh, I'm gonna make money or no. But like, hopefully I will pay the investors back. Hopefully Steve is still trying to make sure that I pay him back on his investment. We are partners. Laurene too, in ways, in the private sector. But this is just crazy. You're doing an operation that you are not looking at how much money you have in the bank. My credit cards are very gone by then. They give me a line of credit that my wife is like, that's great. We're not going to retire rich, Jose. Like I told you. And Laurene arrives and was use the connections with other people. People like Ted Leonsis, I know many of them are partners in other enterprises where they are helping us. All the people at the Wizards and the Capitals from DC. And all of a sudden, they put together a whole bunch of people that they were not only supporting us financially in the short term, but with connections to other things that we could be needing. And this is why it's so important, these kind of things you do, this networking, knowing each other. Every minute you spend with a person, making sure that matters. If we did Puerto Rico in many ways, when Laurene and all her team of Emerson show up, it's this moment like almost is giving you this kind of, I've been a sailor in the Spanish Navy, and you cannot sail without wind. You don't see it, you cannot touch it. You cannot put it in. It's an intangible. But when someone comes and gives you wind behind the sails and you feel you can go anywhere, that's a very powerful thing to do. So obviously, Laurene has been a blessing in my personal life for more reasons than one, her team. But there's so many people, you in the room, we all can be always be that wind behind the sails in certain moments. We all need to know when we become that wind. That wind is one of the things that really can be moving humanity forward. We all need to be wind sometimes. When you came, Laurene, you were that wind. And we've been working in many other things. I mean, Laurene does so many things. I don't keep up of what she does, impacting in so many areas. In our work in World Central Kitchen, in many ways, we are doing what we're doing now. Remember Bahamas? We did 80,000 meals a day, people. We were the only ones on ground zero for 11 days. 80,000 meals a day. That's what we became. For me, it's even easier if nobody else shows up. Why? Because if they tell me, you have to feed everybody, you're like, great, let's do it. But anyway, this is what we've been doing since Puerto Rico. Even we began 11, 12 years ago in Haiti, really the big beginning of what World Central Kitchen has become was Puerto Rico in more ways than one. And since then, we keep learning, and we keep improving, and we keep maximizing our resources. And so far, we are still learning, but you know, slowly but surely, we try to keep feeding in emergencies as many people as we can.
And they learn a lot about what works, what can be done better, and to share that information with some of the global players is really, really important. So I'd like to emphasize that. I mean, Jose has no problem speaking up to anybody, obviously, but it's really important for those who actually care about our connection from human to human, as our sisters and brothers who are in times of trauma and catastrophe, to actually keep getting better and better. And I think that sometimes there's some of the amazing UN organizations, and everyone understands how difficult it must be to have that kind of global enterprise operating. Obviously, they can always get better. And to have the kind of nimble speedboat that is Jose and World Central Kitchen can really help the ocean liners course correct.
Nimble speedboat, that's great.
And I went
tweet
into
right there.
New Orleans.
Yes.
I land from Haiti earthquake. I land in New Orleans. And I had one person that seemed to know everybody in New Orleans. Everybody will give him a hug. He knew where the need was. We were able to be in Little Caillou within 24 hours, in Huma within 24 hours, in Low Nine within 24 hours. I can say almost the mistakes of what happened in Katrina were somehow solved. We were there feeding a lot of people. Who I had next to me as a translator, driver, a guy called Mitch Landrieu. If you are in New Orleans, shit, you want to have Mitch Landrieu next to you. And especially if you are in New Orleans in an emergency, that guy knows emergency. I met Mitch Landrieu through an event that Emerson did, and through Laurene and all. Having Mitch Landrieu in New Orleans next to us, it made World Central Kitchen so much better organization. That's why in my life I learned every connection, every moment, every opportunity to establish relationships is so important, because down the road, especially when people need you the most, you never know when those friendships and those moments are going to help you to feed maybe entire city, or to me feed entire state. So every second counts, people, always, every moment counts.
Laurene, you and Jose have so many shared passions, including storytelling and journalism, but one of them is system redesign, and that's something that Emerson Collective is very focused on. What have you learned, what can we learn from the joint work that you've done to feed people who need it?
So a lot of what he's describing is a new design for a system. So new design for humanitarian response, for feeding at scale, but also using networks, using the kind of 21st century tools and technologies and relationships and networks that exist across the planet. And not to ignore those networks, and understanding also the wisdom that resides in communities. No one knows better than the people who actually live in a community what the community needs. And having that mindset to actually tap into all the resources on the ground, both repurposing of assets, but also the human ingenuity that exists in every single pocket on this planet, it is in some ways obvious and in other ways profound. So all the systems that touch humans in our arc of life, all of our social systems, they're all powered by networks. And so making sure that you can get proximate enough to understand what the proper networks are, and then having a holistic view of how do we actually activate all these networks from government and business and civil society and philanthropy and activism and arts, and then communications and storytelling and market. All of these come to bear, and everybody has a role to play.
And Jose, a precept that I've heard you talk a lot about that's related to this is involving local people. So you did a New York Times best-selling book, We Fed an Island, about your experiences in Puerto Rico. And there's a photo in there that really struck me. It was a human chain of people delivering hot meals. And so you, at every turn, you seem to recruit local cooks, local help.
Yeah.
I mean, who better than the locals? We are thousands of people now in World Central Kitchen across Ukraine and the 6 countries. We are literally thousands. How many people I can fly in from outside? It's always better when locals involve themselves. In the process, you are creating resilience, because when something happens, we are activated within hours. Is an earthquake in Puerto Rico right now? In 6, sometimes we need to stop them, because in 3 hours they're feeding everybody. I'm like, hold on a second, this looks like a party. Do they need it or not? They activate themselves because the lessons of the past, the locals are already learning the lessons. They know how to work with us. They are almost like our food militia in a way. They are not in our payroll. They are not working with World Central Kitchen every day, every month, every year. Well, when something happens, they self-activate themselves like if they were a National Guard of food. That's when we show up 1 or 2 days later, 3 days later, we've already been feeding from the first few hours. This is kind of the resilience we've been able to be feeding. In Ukraine, some restaurants were obviously feeding people in need. Many restaurants were closed because many people were moving out. Remember, we had 4 million people I don't know now the exact number. I've not been looking for the last few weeks, but 4. But we have many more million that they are inside
Internally
Ukraine,
displaced.
that they've been displaced. And everybody seems to be doing something. What we began doing was picking up the phones. I'm like, hey, you're doing 100 meals a day, we see on Twitter. If we support you and we partner, can you do 500? And they're like, sure. Obviously, that's a trap. Because once they do 500 for 3 days, next question is, can you do 1,000?
You sprung the trap.
And some of the best restaurants, now we have close to 220 restaurants, I think, or something like that, or more maybe, that every one of them, we are maximizing what they do. And what happens is all the restaurants that were closed, they look what we are doing with others, and they call us and they tell us, can we join you? So World Central Kitchen, in a way, and others maybe they don't call us and they do it on their own. So in a way, what we are is, you know, like Hunger Games, if you saw that movie, that they do those videos of, this is very powerful because you are calling others to action, and others that they are wondering, what can I do? All of a sudden, like, okay, I'm gonna do what they do, or I'm gonna join them. And so all of a sudden, why we can do so many numbers so quickly, so fast? Well,
The National Guard of Food.
okay, remember one thing. World Central Kitchen at this point, without any doubt in my mind, is the biggest organization ever created in the history of humanity. Yeah, sounds pretentious at least. Why? In my brain, and has been always been the way I want to create it, to be small and slim, but big as much as fast as we want. Every single restaurant in the world belongs to World Central Kitchen. Every warehouse with food belongs to World Central Kitchen. They don't know it yet, but eventually it happens. Marcus Samuelsson, one of my dear friends, an amazing chef with amazing story, a great soul. He became big lead in all the meals in Newark, all the meals in Harlem. Marcus Samuelsson took care during the pandemic. Marcus, once I saw him during the pandemic one night, comes and gives me a hug and tells me, Jose, you remember 2, 3, 4 years ago that when we were having a meeting about how to engage World Central Kitchen, that you told us, don't worry, the important thing is that you are here today in this meeting. The day we need you, you will know. Marcus said, I don't understand. Jose doesn't want me to belong to this organization. He said, that day I saw him in the streets in Harlem after doing hundreds of thousands of meals for his people there. Jose, now I understand what you were trying to tell me. That's why I'm telling you World Central Kitchen, to a degree, is the biggest organization in the history with the smallest payroll and group of people in the history at the same time. But if I need to grow that organization to 10,000 people overnight, we do it like this. This is what we're trying to do in World Central Kitchen.
Elise is about to give us the hook, so we're going to do a little rapid round here. Pull back the curtain, look at some of the other work that each of you are doing. Laurene, if you want to talk about a system redesign, public high schools have to be one of the biggest possible projects to take on. Emerson has XQ. Tell us about it.
Yes. Thanks. Yeah. I've been working in education for over 25 years and mainly working with high school students who have the ambition to go on to higher ed, but are generally first generation. So in their families and in their communities, they don't have a pathway that's highly articulated necessarily. So that's the work that we've done, and it's informed actually so much of all the work that I do in my life about how to use the tools in front of us to actually get access to the information and the pathways so that people can have a life of their own design. With my colleague Ruslan Ali, after she came out of the Obama administration, she also had a passion for data and high school and changing the actual lived experience within high school and what people ended up graduating knowing what to do and the capacities and foundational knowledges that everyone should have had. So we started with first principles thinking what is it that we think everyone who graduates from high school should be able to do, should be able to know? You know, when people say problem solving or critical thinking, what does that really mean? And how do you teach to that? And how do you teach to that when you have fixed math and then history and then science and then English? That's all sitting in a seat, changing a class, sitting in a seat, changing a class. And while the work can be engaging, it's really quite siloed. And so we worked with amazing thought leaders, educators, administrators, students, parents, to architect a pathway by which communities can come together and actually create, in a greenfielding way, what they believe is the ideal high school for this moment. Because the way that high schools were structured 100 plus years ago was the structure for that moment in the early 20th century. But it actually doesn't work in the early 21st century for so many reasons. So much of the world has changed in a fundamental way. And then we had an open call across America for communities to come together and field teams to actually build out and redesign high schools that would educate students so that they can be ready for career or college after high school, and mapping onto the workforce demands in their local communities. And we ended up having, this was 7 years ago, we ended up having over 10,000 people, all 50 states were represented. We had 700 teams that went through this 7-month program of a designer for learning. And we thought that we would end up funding and supporting 5 high schools that were new designs that could serve as a beacon and an example of what's possible. But we had so many amazing designs across the country. We now have 27 XQ high schools in states like Texas and Tennessee and Michigan and Indiana and
so 5-ish.
New York. Yeah, 5-ish. And now full districts are actually looking at the new models of schools and have a strong appetite to actually pivot and have completely different knowledge base and competencies as a result of what they're seeing other communities do. So it's very, very exciting and optimistic work. We see the repurposing of assets, like in the school in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that is now a high school inside a museum in Grand Rapids that uses all of the artifacts in the museum as part of their learning. And then the one that I was mentioning in Indiana is in Indianapolis. It's called Purdue Polytechnic, and that high school is connected to Purdue University. And actually, Mitch Daniels was part of the design team wanting to answer the gap in their workforce and teach students differently. And that one's about project-based learning and really oriented around kind of big challenges. We see one in Louisiana that's actually oriented around studying coastal erosion and the effects of the changing climate on the low levels in the United States. And just, it makes learning absolutely relevant and very, very exciting. And so since we're still in early days, but the results are quite encouraging and thrilling.
Jose, we had to start heavy at the top, but so many people in our audience associate you and your restaurants with happy times backstage. Sarah Fisher and I were talking about the time that at Haleo here in DC, we had croquettes in a sneaker. Mm-hmm. That was your idea?
Yeah.
In a sneaker, did you say?
Yes.
It's not something I like to share much because everybody hits me on Instagram and Twitter, and now I say it's not my idea. But yeah.
Okay, so.
But let me tell you what I did.
Do you use other kinds of shoes?
Yeah, campers, but this gets me talking then to senators and congressmen when they come to my restaurants. And then I'm able to tell them why we don't end food deserts in America. Yesterday, Republicans and Democrats worked together. Or why we don't have a food White House conference as when I had with President Biden town hall, that we were talking about how food could be what end many of the problems that we have in America and around the world. And why we don't do a national guard of food fighters so we can be there next to the poor people when they need it the most. And why we don't make food actually a true agent of change to make not only America a better place, but the world itself. So a sneaker like this gives me this opportunity to engage with those politicians and others to tell them, if we can serve croquetas in a shoe, imagine what else we cannot do if we put all of our minds together.
Okay.
I am with Andrés and I endorse this shoe.
Real quick, because we're over our time and I'm going to get in trouble, but Laurene and I both want you to tell, backstage you said, I have to tell a story about shooting. And I said, no. And you said,
no, it didn't begin that way.
No.
You told me something about the scuba diving.
Yeah, he said, I want to ask you about scuba, but I think Jose heard shooting, and so he said, well, I actually have a funny story about shooting, which
promises
so
it's
now he's going to
G-rated.
tell.
But we began talking about diving, about going diving together,
Yes,
because
fair
Laurene
enough.
loves diving, I love diving, even with this body, I'm a great diver. I went down on a submarine 500 meters in Galapagos with National Geographic. And from the 500 meters down, I mean, technically I brought water with me, so I've been feeding people at 500 meters
Oh my
under the
goodness.
water. But now, I don't know if you read, I did one dish, paella, that is going to be served in the space station in the next few days. Are you
Okay,
connecting
but
the
what is
dots?
this
So I
scuba?
fed people very in the bottom of the ocean. I'm feeding people at the top of the space. And then I'm in Kyiv before curfew, and the alarm sounds in my phone. It's not a missile alarm, it's the space station alarm. Because the space station is passing through, I'm looking, oh my God, the space station is to my slide. Where do I go to? A checkpoint with 8 military doing their job. I'm able to be away from the lights. The military comes. What are you doing? The space station. The guy looks, smiles. The space station. And then the space station. Me, I'm looking at the space station. He shoots something in Ukrainian down. Next thing, what happens? Everybody's shooting to this white thing, a star moving in the sky. Da 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 da. They thought it was a drone. They thought they were. Kyiv is a city super safe, because even when people saw something moving like this, like what's a star, they will shoot at it. So between my love for scuba diving, going to the bottom of the ocean, to my love to feed on the space station astronauts, and my love to follow these, I almost created an international conflict. when I tell the guy, I told you it was a space station. What the guy tells me, were Russians in the space station. I'm like, yeah, but they're astronauts. They're not military.
Jose, Andres, Laurene Powell, thank you for joining Axios What's Next. Amazing. Thank you.